Okay, so today's lesson is looking at the impacts of Westernisation and Modernisation. So modernisation is what we're going to look at first, and it is the process of change from traditional to modern societies. And what this means essentially is what we're going to look at in more depth, is how all societies, because all societies are on arguably a process of modernisation, have gone from more basic societies to more modern ones. So there are two types of societies, or at least in the aspects of ideas of modernisation, and that is traditional and then modern societies. And traditional societies are usually agricultural societies, they're mostly rural. Examples of this could be like the Maasai or some parts of Southeast Asia. What makes them traditional is that there's less industries and fewer institutions. So they might have basic ones like local government and some schooling, whereas more modern societies have much greater institutions and therefore are seen to be more complex. And there are several industries to the industries and institutions are kind of backed off each other. Now, how traditional societies get to become more modern is through what we kind of define as the process of industrialisation. For any society to really be determined to be modern, it needs to go through this process of industrialisation. And what that really means is there is a lowering of traditional authorities and practices, and so this means like there's no longer community elders, or there's less involvement in religious leaders or community groups in the individual lives of persons within those societies, which therefore creates a more modern, individualised society. Okay, so now we're going to look at how we can understand or identify modern societies. So the way we can see it is usually through a greater demand for certain labour skills. This will lead to, or which does lead to, a greater need for education as people and society become independent. So good examples of this could be the fact that businesses now rely on school institutions and even government institutions to help support the businesses by providing regulation and syllabuses to help kind of develop the skills and educational level of the future working classes to help support those businesses. And therefore, these institutions become interdependent because then the government relies on the businesses to help kind of support the growing working force. Modern societies also, therefore, pursue goals of economic growth. Therefore, they invest heavily in media, transport, and communication. And as such, this leads to social mobility. So through this pursuit of economic growth, so focusing on building up those industries, it provides greater opportunities for individuals, and therefore they can utilise these opportunities and these resources to improve their socio-economic status overall. So this could be seen as why modern societies tend to be more focused on individuals' needs and desires. And lastly, all of this kind of pursuit for economic growth and demand for certain labour skills could be seen as causes for greater employment opportunities, as already discussed through the introduction of these industries, greater needs and access and opportunities of education, because as mentioned, these industries rely on the education to build up their workforce. And through all of this, as already mentioned, that the leading to social mobility, there's greater acknowledgement of civil and political rights. So therefore, modern societies tend to be more complex in their institutions and their expectations and norms, as there's no clear set roles. So traditional societies, very clear set roles. If you're a woman, you do this. If you're a man, you do this. If you're an adult, you are expected to, take care of your family. If you're a child, you're expected to support your family. Whereas in industrialised modern societies, there's no clear set roles for any one individual, and as a society and as groups, we need to kind of decide what they are, and that's why there's so many laws and regulations, and that's why it's considered complex. So, to understand the process of change in terms of modernisation, we need to focus on the process of modernity and where it can be seen. And so, this is mostly through the increased rates of urbanisation, as people tend to move to cities during the process of industrialisation in search for greater jobs and economic prospects. Therefore, societies become more urban and less rural. Other rates, we can also see this through increased rates of technological developments, as through industrialisation, technology becomes more innovative and a greater need for it develops. It's also seen through an increased rate of changing social relationships. So, through increasing workforce participation, increasing urbanisation, and greater freedoms that come from this, marriage becomes less important. So, new ways of living as a family kind of gets established. And then lastly, an increased rate of aesthetics, like through clothing, architecture, and so on. This is because as we develop and become more modern, we also become more focused on aesthetics as a way of demonstrating our social status and independence. So therefore, we become more focused on our desires rather than our needs. So current Western societies have already gone through this process of modernisation, and therefore like they're in a new state, which is known or seen as reflexive modernisation, which basically means we begin to reflect on our society and reform and reorganise it based on those reflections. So clear examples of this can be seen in through kind of movements and reactions to the way we're living, and this can be seen through things like the sustainability movement. So the push to use our resources more sustainably is kind of like a reflection on our kind of growing attitudes of consumption and consumerism that have come from being modern. Feminism is another really good example of this, and this is again reflecting on how we think our society should be and what we think we should be doing within it. And then obviously the green movement, which is kind of like that sustainability movement, where it's just looking at how we think our society should operate and behave, and how we think we should best use those resources. And again, this is all about reflecting on our behaviours and our attitudes and what we think our society should be now that we've modernised. Okay, so now we're going to look at Westernisation. And Westernisation is essentially the process of aspects of culture, of Western culture being spread around the world. So it's essentially looking at how Western values, ideals, beliefs, attitudes get spread globally. So this usually occurs through these factors that I'm going to outline. So firstly is the transnational corporations, or TNCs, and this can bring about a process of westernisation is through businesses and products, values and practices can be shared globally. Westernisation can also occur through tourism. So as Western nations so Western groups of people start to travel around the world, they expose their ideals through interactions with the natives or people that are living in non-Western countries. Intergovernmental agreements are also a way that Western ideals can be spread around the world. And what this means essentially is that governments, especially Western ones, can spread Western ideals through trade or diplomatic agreements. So all of these factors sees the spreading of ideas, values, language, fashion, technology, diet, religion, politics, laws and lifestyle. And we usually look at this throughout Asia, Africa and South America, as these groups are considered not to be Western. Okay, and lastly, what I'm going to do is explain to you examples of Westernisation. It can be really hard to separate Westernisation and modernisation, as most Western societies are modern. And so hopefully these two examples I'm going to go through will help to try to clarify the differences between Westernisation and modernisation when looking at other societies. So two clear examples of modernisation can be seen through the spread of feminism and individualism. This is because countries like India and China, and when we get into more depth, you'll see Afghanistan as well, are currently during their period of modernization, not reflexive modernism. And as such, feminism and individualism could arguably be seen as features that come about in modern societies once they start to reflect. Therefore, the existence of these kind of ideals or attitudes within these societies, like in China and India, that are still in a process of modernization, could be seen to be brought about by Western influences, as Western societies have a heavy influence on these groups. Therefore, it is arguably feminism and individualism exist in these societies because of Westernism, not modernism, as they should not be present at this current point in their process of modernization. The examples given on top in those pictures could be seen as Westernization, but could arguably also be seen as modernization. So sometimes it's hard to differentiate the two. So hopefully these examples help. So what you need to do now is make sure you refer back to your revision notes and record the most important information from this video.